Hey everyone, I am pleased to announce that I have a new co-host here at Sounds Good Makes Sense, at least in a more official capacity than she's been around previously. I'm of course speaking of Nikki the cat, who often comes and sits on a chair that I used to sit here. Now she has her own little bed, so she can sit here and hang out and contribute to the podcast by licking my hand. Such valuable insights. I don't know how we ever got by without her. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, the discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. My name is Devilor, and we have a lot to talk about. If you're somehow not already aware, Blizzard released a video this last week that had some pretty interesting stuff in it about the future of World of Warcraft, at least as it refers to add-ons. Obviously, they started off this video, they were talking a bit about two new features that are coming in 11.1.7. That is, of course, the rotation assist feature, as well as the one button rotation helper. I forget exactly the term they're using to describe it, but the one button rotation feature that they're adding in 11.1.7. They also talked a little bit more about the cooldown manager, just a little bit more about the cooldown manager in that video. But more importantly, they talked about plans for future features, such as things like damage meters that they're going to add directly into the game. Things like a boss, they called it a boss timeline that they will add directly into the game. All of this with the eventual goals of two things. Goal number one, just make it so you don't need add-ons to play the game. That seems fair. But the second goal that they talked about has really got people in a tizzy, and that is the goal to eventually scale back the add-on API so that a lot of what add-ons are currently doing is no longer possible. And just from this 45-minute video that they put out, there's already so many topics that I want to dive into, and we're not going to be able to get to all of it today. But things like how will adding these features, like what will be the immediate effects of adding these features into the game, the rotation assist and the one button rotation helper. What are the immediate effects of those being added into the game in 11.1.7? What can Blizzard do with things like this and other things like damage meters and so on that external add-ons cannot? What are the sorts of things that Blizzard could potentially do themselves that would require, for an add-on to be able to do it, would require exposing things to the add-on API that Blizzard doesn't want? What are the sort of things that Blizzard can then do internally that external add-ons would not be capable of? And vice versa. What are the sort of external things that add-ons would be able to do and can kind of get away with that Blizzard wouldn't necessarily want to be stuff that they would put inside of an official add-on that they add officially into the game? There's also the potential like social ramifications of directly adding something like a damage meter into the game and supporting that playstyle of comparing yourself against other players and comparing other players against like you in that regard. And what are the potential social ramifications of adding that directly into the game and supporting that playstyle? What sort of things will Blizzard have to do with all of these features in order to actually make it viable to have this eventual goal of scaling back the add-on API? And finally, possibly the big question on top of all of this is, how well will Blizzard be able to pull any of this off? Now, again, I'm not going to dig into all of that today. I have a feeling that the next several weeks are going to be digging into various different types of topics and various different discussions and speculations and so on about all of the stuff that, like, just my mind is going crazy with all the different possibilities and all the different ways that this can affect the game in the future. There's a lot to dig into and talk about in all this. So we're going to have to split this out over multiple videos. Otherwise, I would be here for the next 3 hours. I'll just throw a quick reminder if you haven't already seen it. I ended up watching this video live on stream in the process, and I wasn't originally planning to turn that into a video to put on YouTube, but it ended up resulting in a lot of very interesting, immediate, like almost sort of knee-jerk reactions and discussions that occurred after that. So if you are curious to get all of my unedited, just straight off the top of my head thoughts about this video as I was originally watching it, that is available. I did end up putting that on YouTube. It's 2.5 hours long, and that's just me covering the stuff that they talked about in that video, plus a couple of points of discussion here and there. And that's why I know that I need to break this whole topic up into multiple different videos, because otherwise it's going to take forever. But if you do want to see all of those, goodbye, Nikki. If you do want to see all of those unedited thoughts, you can follow that directly here on YouTube. You just didn't want to sit in your bed anymore? You're just going to sit there instead? Okay. As far as today's video goes, I want to start with the broad strokes. I want to start with the like high level overview, what is the overall concept that Blizzard is presenting here? What are some of the challenges that they're going to encounter trying to pursue this eventual goal? And what do I even think about any of these goals in the first place? We'll start with the first stated goal, and probably the more immediate one of the two, which is the idea to no longer need add-ons, or at the very least make add-ons be more of an optional addition to your gameplay. And that's an important distinction that I want to get out of the bat straight away. The question here isn't whether or not you need add-ons to play World of Warcraft. Nobody needs add-ons to play WoW. The question is whether or not is having an add-on adding a significant enough amount of capability to you as a player that it is worth adding on and doesn't really feel optional. Essentially, the idea is if you take any given player in the game at any skill level, you take that player and you say, okay, here's how they function without add-ons, and here's how they function with add-ons. What's the delta of the difference between the two? What's the amount of extra effectiveness, and how much easier does the game get for them when they add the add-ons in? Is that something that is a significant increase in capabilities, or is it just sort of like a little bit of extra nice to have, or maybe just something that tailors it a little bit more directly to their tastes, but doesn't really add any functionality that they didn't have otherwise? So ultimately for the game, it's a better thing to have it in a state where if you play the game just out of the box how it is, versus if you install a few add-ons, there isn't such a massive like shift in your personal capabilities. There isn't such a massive increase in how effective you are as a player just by having these add-ons installed. And obviously there's a little bit of setup involved, but just by having those put in place, there shouldn't be such a massive shift in what you as a player are capable of, as well as how much information is being presented to you in a way that's easily digestible and understandable. And again, the goal here, even from what Blizzard has been saying, isn't to get rid of add-ons. It's just to make them optional, make them something that you feel as though you can still perform at a similar level to other players without having these add-ons installed. And I'll be honest, watching this video, the way they were talking about it, Ian especially, the way Ian was talking about it in the video, made me think that maybe this add-on, I don't know if crisis is the right term, but the proliferation of add-ons through World of Warcraft is worse off than I had even anticipated. Like there's a couple times in the video where Ian mentions that, and I quote, most players have a damage meter installed or have some form of these add-ons installed. And when he says most players, I assume like he's not saying like most endgame players. He's not saying most players who have add-ons. He literally just said most players. Now it's possible that he just didn't want to throw in the extra words of most players with add-ons or most players at endgame. And also, honestly, at this point in the expansion's life cycle, it's possible there isn't that much of a difference. Like the number of people that are still playing the War Within after patch 11, like how many weeks it is after patch 11.1 dropped, it's probably mostly people that the most of the people that are still sticking around are probably mostly people who are focused on endgame, because all of the like new quest progression and stuff that was done ages ago. So realistically, either way, it sounds like what Ian is saying is that of the current player base of World of Warcraft, the majority of them, it is more likely than not that you have some sort of combat add-on installed, that you have boss mods installed, that you have damage meters installed, and so on. And one other thing that came up when I was originally watching this video that makes this goal even more valuable to Blizzard overall and to the player base by extension, in this particular case at least, is that there's a lot of class design ramifications that occur and a lot of issues with class design that only crop up because of the existence of add-ons like this, or at the very least because these add-ons can make a player so much more effective. Like if you're designing a class and you're looking at a player in terms of difficulty for the class at the very least, and a player at the bottom end of the skill level, we'll say, with or without add-ons, is such a massive difference in effectiveness that really changes how you can even approach the way that you're designing these classes in the first place. If you're just assuming that the only way that players can understand a more difficult class is by having these add-ons installed, and thus as a result, someone who is playing a more difficult class and isn't using these combat helper add-ons is now like just doing dirt level DPS as a result, or dirt level effectiveness as a result, that has some issues with class design in terms of how they can even build those classes in the first place. So by incorporating some of this stuff directly into the base game and giving every player these tools that previously only those who have add-ons available would have, even if most players have that currently, it would help shore up that difference at the bottom end of skill levels, which affects how Blizzard is able to approach things like class design in terms of complexity and difficulty in terms of how to actually play those characters. Obviously, at the top end of capabilities, add-ons are not like the best players are still going to, they still have to think about like, what is, if you're playing this character to its absolute fullest, what is the top level of effectiveness? And add-ons don't have as much of an impact there because you're just kind of assuming everybody is playing this thing pretty much perfectly already anyway. It's more a question of how bad does it get? Like if you are a affliction warlock or whatever the most complicated spec for warlock right now is considered to be, are you really bad if you're not using add-ons, or are you just kind of bad if you're low skill level and not using add-ons, and so on? Of course, the immediate question that all of this kind of begs, in a sense, especially the way that Ian presented it as they were first talking about this in the video, where he was talking about, I forget exactly what his words were in the video, but something to the effect of, yeah, our game has become so complicated and there's so much going on all the time that we have to install all of these add-ons, or we have to incorporate the effectiveness of all these add-ons in order for players to understand what's going on, which immediately makes everyone, myself included, think, okay, but why are you making the game so complicated in the first place? Like most of what I end up using add-ons for myself, things like weak auras and so on, is just to decomplicate things that otherwise are hard to keep track of or difficult to watch for. Procs that I wouldn't otherwise know are there, or buffs that I wouldn't, like temporary damage buffs that I wouldn't otherwise know are there, so I know to prioritize certain moves over others. Those are the sorts of things that that's what I'm using add-ons for these days. But if the game wasn't so complicated to where I had to be watching for all these different buffs and debuffs, or I had to be watching for all these different procs and things, then obviously I wouldn't need those things in the first place. So why not just make the game not be so complicated? And the more I think about this, the more thought that I put into why not just make the game less complicated? Why not solve this problem more accurately? Why not solve this problem by making the game less complicated to the extent where it's not a problem anymore? The more I actually really appreciate Blizzard's approach here. Now, yes, obviously there are some parts of the game right now, some classes, some systems and so on, that are overcomplicated and bloated and don't need to be nearly as complicated as they are. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be some amount of decomplication done, especially to certain specs and to certain systems in the game. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the act of taking the game and making it so uncomplicated that these add-ons are no longer helpful, that could actually be a pretty bad thing. Like the fundamental changes that would need to happen to the game just to take it to a spot where you no longer get any benefit from having like a rotation helper add-on, or you no longer get any benefit from having weak auras that tell you what your abilities are up to, or tell you when procs are active, or so on. Taking the game to a point where you don't benefit from any of those things would require the game to be changed so significantly that Blizzard would risk the result being people looking at it and going, this kind of doesn't even feel like WoW anymore. Also, let's try and remember here, we tried ability pruning once before in World of Warcraft's history, and it sucked. It was really, really bad. So maybe let's not do that again. And honestly, I always feel it's a very, very good thing when a developer is willing to take a look at how their players are experiencing their game, how players are approaching their game, and what the actual experience, what it's like to play their video game. And they look at that and they latch onto what is it that players are doing, what is it that players are enjoying about the game, and really focus on that rather than trying to turn the game into something that maybe fits their original vision or whatever. It's so important for a game developer to be able to look at what their players are doing and what's fun about their video game and what players are enjoying, and make that be the experience for as many people as possible. And the fact is, things like boss mods, things like weak auras, things like damage meters, heck, even things like rotation helpers are kind of how people play the game, and they have been for a long time. The World of Warcraft experience for a long, long time has included all of these things as part of playing the game. I mean, boss mods and damage meters especially have been a core part of the endgame World of Warcraft experience since Classic. Those have been around since literally Molten Core back in the day. That's something that has always existed as part of World of Warcraft. Having a boss mod that tells you when the next ability is going to be, having a damage meter, healing meter, whatever else that shows you how everyone in your raid is performing, that has always, literally always existed inside World of Warcraft. And while boss mods are maybe less mandatory for raiding nowadays than they used to be, especially on the lower difficulties, like LFR, you kind of don't need a boss mod because you kind of don't need to know what's happening in LFR, like full stop. And then normal mode, you can kind of get away with not having one as long as, you know, you're paying attention and you kind of understand the fights. But like heroic and mythic raiding, they're still pretty much considered mandatory. And even in those lower difficulties, you are making the conscious choice not to use them. There are very, very few players who are not using a boss mod because they don't know that boss mods exist. Most of the time it is they have chosen not to install one because they decided they didn't want it. And I would also make the argument that damage meters are, at least again in higher difficulties of content, pretty much mandatory as well. Not so much from a like, oh, I need to be able to be top on the DPS meters sort of thing. Like everyone, when you think of damage meters, that's kind of the first place a lot of people's brain goes is I just want to be on top of the meters. But there's such an important tool for like self-reflection and learning and understanding like, okay, I'm near the bottom of the meters. I need to figure out how to up my DPS. Or there's another person in my group that's doing way more damage than me. Let me compare how they're using spells and what spells they're using and like how many times they're using. Like, there's so much that you can learn that can improve your play by looking at a damage meter and understanding what's going on with it, that otherwise you just don't get that information at all, at least not in a relatively easy digestible format. And honestly, most other people are running a damage meter anyway. So if you're not using one, it's at least helpful to know what other people are looking at. That's kind of a big topic that I'm going to end up doing a whole other video just on damage meters and what Blizzard can do about it. So we're going to kind of shelve the damage meter discussion for now and we'll move on. My point is that the way that players experience World of Warcraft and the way that endgame content, especially in WoW, exists, the way that you play the game pretty much has always from the beginning of time included some of these add-ons and is included having things that are like, there's a bar on the screen that tells you when the next boss ability is going to be. There's something that's telling you what's going on beyond it. Like even rotation helpers have existed for a long time. Like I remember back during heroic Lich King progression, back in Icecrown Citadel, way back in Wrath of the Lich King. I remember because there was so much going on in that fight and because I was the raid leader, I remember installing a rotation helper just so I didn't have to think as much about my rotation and could instead spend that time looking at what the next boss ability is, calling things out like, okay, there's a defile coming up, get ready to spread. Everybody get to the edges because he's about to do his move. Now get back in because it's about to end. Like I needed to be able to make those call outs while playing I was playing a Retribution Paladin. I need to be able to make those call outs while doing my rotation at the same time. And so I just put on a rotation helper just to pop up what the next button I should push is in case I wasn't able to pay as much attention to my own DPS at the time. And if you look at Classic and especially SOD, you'll see like weak auras are super popular in both Classic and SOD. So there's clearly a benefit to having them. And so it's not that the game once existed in a state where these things didn't help. They just didn't exist at the time. So if Blizzard was to go to the extent of changing World of Warcraft to such a degree that there is no longer a benefit, like a notable benefit to using a rotation helper, to using weak auras, to using boss mods, if Blizzard was to go to that extreme, they would basically have to turn WoW into a different game. It would no longer be the same as the game has been since it originally released in 2004. Again, yes, the game is definitely overcomplicated in a lot of ways right now. Things like too many what I call clutter procs, like just buffs that show up that you don't ever pay attention to or think about, such that it might as well have just been a talent that increases your DPS by 1% because you're just not paying attention to what this proc is. Things like too many currencies, things like the crafting system, just like in general. Yes, there are ways that the game is too complicated right now, and I think Blizzard needs to pare some of that back a little bit, but I don't think solving the add-on problem through that method is viable because it just means turning World of Warcraft into a different game entirely than it has ever been. And to Blizzard's credit, Ian mentioned this briefly in the video as well. Not the whole thing about turning WoW into a different game, but the thing about how they do need to decomplicate some things a little bit. There are some things that are a bit too complicated. And how to solve that problem and how to pare that back while still making the game feel like WoW is another big topic that, again, we will get into in another video. I want to move on with the overall look at what Blizzard is presenting in this video that they put out. In summary, for this first stated goal, the goal of making add-ons more optional, making it something that doesn't have as substantial, if any, increase in your capabilities as a player, that's a good goal. Making the game to where it is able to provide the experience that players clearly want without having to go and install external add-ons to be able to get there. That is a good thing. That is ultimately very much in favor of that first stated goal. But that wasn't all that Blizzard talked about in this video, and it kind of feels like maybe there's a gigantic elephant in the room that we should probably talk about. And that elephant takes the form of Blizzard's stated intention to eventually, at some point in the future, scale back the add-on API, essentially making it so that add-ons are not quite as capable of doing everything that they can currently do today. Essentially, they're saying that sometime in this utopian future where, I don't know, world hunger is solved, billionaires no longer exist, and you don't need add-ons to play World of Warcraft, they'll be able to scale back a bit on what they're feeding to the add-on API so that they're not quite as capable of, quote unquote, playing the game for you as they are today. Now, there are some decent reasons for why they want to do this. Most of them boil down to encounter design. They want to be able to make fights that challenge players to figure out how to resolve something on the fly, figure out how to solve some sort of problem or do something and have to think on their feet a little bit to be able to do something or solve some sort of boss mechanic or whatever without worrying about some weak aura or other add-on essentially doing all the thinking for you and just telling you what the result is. I think there's also a general sense of just boss difficulty and how bosses are even designed from the core that goes on with this as well. Essentially, if some of the mechanics in a fight aren't being completely trivialized by add-ons, then those fights can have fewer mechanics overall. They can make these fights less complicated if they don't have to assume that players are making some of the easier things just automatically happen due to add-ons, again, playing the game for them. And while Blizzard will say that they don't design encounters around add-ons or they don't design encounters for add-ons, the reality is they do still design encounters towards player behavior. They design encounters around what have players found difficult in the past. If you're an encounter designer and you come up with some mechanic and you add it into the game, and then it turns out that mechanic is really, really easy and players don't find that super challenging, regardless of why that is, you are then going to look in the future at that mechanic as being an easy one for players to handle. So if you're in designing another encounter later on and you feel like it needs just a little bit more to it, you might throw that mechanic or some similar version of it into that same encounter. And while that's not quite the same as designing for add-ons, they're not sitting and saying like, okay, we're going to add this encounter to the game so that DBM can have a bar for it or anything like that. It does still mean that they are designing encounters in a way that players then, as they experience them, will end up using add-ons for, which affects how difficult the boss fights are, which affects how easy it is for them to progress through them, which affects how Blizzard designs future encounters. So from a purely philosophical standpoint, I can kind of get on board with this idea of reducing the scope of the add-on API and just making add-ons less capable of solving a lot of those problems for you. From a philosophical standpoint, ignoring many facts in the process, the concept here I think is sound. Like if they're able to open up more possibilities for different types of mechanics in various encounters, that means we can have more variety in those encounters. And that's a good thing. Like having boss fights that feel different and having more variety in what you're actually encountering as you're going through a raid instance, that's a good thing. And one thing that Blizzard actually brought up in this video is that there's definitely an over-reliance on like, just don't stand in the swirly as a mechanic right now, because don't stand in the swirly is a mechanic that really an add-on can't necessarily solve for you. They're going to put a graphic on the ground. The add-ons don't know whether you're standing in that graphic or not. There might occasionally be some ability to put like an alert out based on how things are working. But for the most part, if there's just a swirly on the ground that says something is eventually going to happen here, an add-on's not going to tell you to get out of that. And an add-on doesn't need to because you see the swirly anyway. So you get out of it. There's an over-reliance on that specific type of mechanic right now because that's one of the abilities and one of the encounter sort of gimmicks that they know they can use without it being something that's trivialized by an add-on. And there's probably a lot of more interesting mechanics interesting boss gimmicks and so on that Blizzard is kind of just throwing out the door immediately because they know, yes, we could go to all the trouble of implementing this like complex puzzle that players have to solve on this encounter, but an add-on will just do the thinking for them. So this isn't actually going to be difficult, and it's going to be a whole bunch of work for us to make a thing that ultimately just boils down to a thing popping up on someone's screen that says what to do about it. So why would we do that in the first place? Let's put something else in there instead. There's probably a lot of interesting and fun encounter design mechanics that can't exist right now because Blizzard knows that an add-on would solve that puzzle for you. Like it keeps coming up, but Ovinax is a big example of this relatively recently, where you had the whole egg mechanic thing and you had specific people needing to go to specific spots. And the way that worked was either you could do a whole bunch of on-the-fly, massive coordination and a ton of thinking that would have made this fight very, very difficult. That would be extremely, especially on mythic difficulty, would have been extremely complicated to try and pull off. Or you could have a weak aura that just tells you where to go stand and not even think about this mechanic in the first place. That is a clear example of a case where what otherwise could have been a very compelling boss encounter got kind of trivialized by the existence of an add-on doing the thinking for you. So then the concept is, if they bake enough of what add-ons are doing into the game itself, not only are they then able to design around what that actually is and make sure that they are designing these encounters effectively around add-ons at that point by making it not be an add-on that's just part of the base game. But also that would then allow them to, without massively impacting the way the game is played, go in and trim back some of what add-ons are capable of so that then they can actually open themselves up to more possibilities in encounter design. And one example that they used in the video to sort of describe what this future state might be, where they have stuff built directly into the game so that you don't need a weak aura, you don't need a boss mod telling you what to do. They actually went back and looked at Mythic Halandris back from Shadowlands, where he had the whole bomb mechanic on Mythic difficulty, where he would spawn 3 and then later another 3 bombs that you had to like juggle around throughout the raid. And you had pairs of people that were trading them off back and forth. But there was a specific timing to that was important so that you didn't like kill yourself because of a debuff that you got when you were trading it. So they had this mechanic where they put these bombs out, but then the bombs put that like clockwork, like rotating thing that would appear over your head, which as a result meant that you didn't need a weak aura. You didn't need anything extra that told you like what was going on with these specific, with this bomb mechanic. It literally was just there and showed, and you just saw directly in the game itself exactly how this was working. And so this is a great example of this sort of future state in which the encounters themselves are actually showing you the information that you need to be able to do the encounter itself by having these tools available directly to the player and having this be something that's baked into the base game itself. It's a great example of what things could be eventually like. But here's the thing. Using a Halandris as an example here of something that's already in the game and what future encounters could be like feels kind of weird because Halandris is already in the game. Like they could be doing this more already. Like why did we have to go back 2 expansions to find an example of them using this feature that's already in the game? Like I get not wanting to overly lean on one boss's memorable mechanic for future encounters. I get that. Like they don't want to just be like, oh, the Halandris thing worked, so let's do that on every encounter from now on, obviously. But surely they could have done that like once or twice more since then, right? And we're kind of already running into that one boss's gimmick is every boss thing with the swirlies right now anyway. So why are they not utilizing this tool that they already have available to them? My point here is it would be way easier to believe that add-ons are the sole reason we don't have more varied encounters if Blizzard was making full use of the stuff that's already available to them when they're creating encounters. Like the concern that this brings to mind for me is if I can look at this, even their own video that they put out, I can look at this and I can immediately see like why, okay, I understand that you have this problem with add-ons, but you're then using this example of something that you did and then you haven't really done that much since then. How am I supposed to believe that the problem is the add-ons in this case and not just that you aren't designing more interesting encounters with the tools you already have available? Like, again, I'm on board with the concept that there are mechanics that would be, like we have examples of Ovinax as well. There are examples of cases where an encounter would be more interesting or could be designed in a way that's more interesting if add-ons weren't solving the game for you. But we kind of then have to ask the question of, would those mechanics even exist anyway if those weren't there, if they're already not using all the encounter tricks and tools that they have available to them? Which, in a way, kind of leads me to perhaps a relatively controversial take on this whole subject, which is that I kind of wish they hadn't said anything about scaling back add-ons yet. And that's not because I think they should like hide this from players or like try and spring it on us as a surprise or like later be like, haha, today we've finally reached the point where we can reach our end game and we've removed add-on functionality and now you all have to deal with our own built-in stuff. Like that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's clear they have a lot more work to do to make what they're talking about sound even remotely feasible. And it would be more believable if more of what was already available to us was in place. Like if they had already designed more encounters that were utilizing the handful of in-game weak aura style stuff that's available to them at the point where they said, and then eventually we'll scale back add-on API. Or if more of the systems that were already in game in a way that people liked, then it would be more believable that eventually they will be able to get to a state where, yes, you don't need these add-ons anymore and you won't miss them when we cut back the API. Like just last week, we were talking about the cooldown manager and I was talking about how it needed to have the ability to customize which abilities show up where on the cooldown manager when it went in the first place, because it's just a much more believable end state that this is going to be something that replaces weak auras in that regard, or at least can fill the role of weak auras in that regard. That's even more important now because really like they're talking all this stuff about how, oh yeah, we're going to build all this stuff into the base game and you're not even going to miss the add-ons anymore. Well, that's not something that they said. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, but they're talking about building so much stuff into the base game that makes it so that you don't need add-ons to do all this stuff that they're doing currently, because the game is just doing it for you. But the only example we have of that existing in the game currently right now, at least on live servers, is not really doing that at all. And while yes, we can obviously imagine a future in which the cooldown manager has those customization options available to it and eventually does get to a state where, yes, people just end up using the cooldown manager and they're not worried about installing weak auras to be able to do that anymore. Yes, we can imagine that future. But because this is like step 1 of 18 on this whole overall thing, that means that final step feels even more imaginary if we have to imagine what the step 1 might look like. Here's a weird example from the real world. If you went back into the 90s, like the late 90s, and you told someone, you time traveled back in the late 90s, and you told someone, hey, yeah, Amazon, by the way, in the future, you're going to be ordering furniture and clothing and groceries off of Amazon. They would look at you and be like, the bookstore? What are you talking about? And regardless of how true that end state is, where people are using Amazon for that sort of thing nowadays, it's just hard to imagine that in an environment where no steps have been made in that direction, or the only steps that have been made in that direction leave a lot to be desired. And the result is that a lot of people are making a, I think, extremely fair knee-jerk reaction to Blizzard talking about scaling back the add-on API at some point in the future by going, whoa, hold on, that's going to be terrible. I don't want that, because it's hard to imagine a future in which those add-ons are no longer necessary, or at the very least, in which those add-ons are optional. So if we were already seeing cases more regularly where Blizzard was using things like the little stuff that pops up over your head more regularly already in encounter design now, or if we were seeing things like the cooldown manager in a state where it's actually functional enough to consider replacing weak auras or not using weak auras and just using the cooldown manager instead, if we could already see some progress being made towards that, it would make this overall goal much more believable. I think that they can get there. I do believe that it is possible. It's hard to imagine currently, knowing the state that the game is currently in. So part of me kind of wishes that they had waited a little bit longer. Like, just talk about the stuff that they're implementing first. Go like, yeah, we're adding this rotation helper. We're adding this one button thing. We're adding this cooldown manager and so on, because we eventually want to get to, like, talk about that first goal all you want. The goal of making add-ons feel optional. Talk about that all you want. But throwing out there so that eventually we can gut all these other add-ons has just made people panic a whole lot when that was unnecessary, because, like, I don't know, they didn't need to talk about it yet. It's not information that they needed to bring to people's attention just yet. And it's so hard to imagine getting there right now because there's still a lot of work on the basic stuff that they need to get done before it even seems feasible. Now, fortunately, I do believe this is a relatively far off goal. I think that the add-on API thing is a distant future, probably not even in the next expansion, maybe for the Last Titan sort of thing, but I don't see it happening in Midnight. I don't see it happening super soon unless Blizzard really wants to get like hyper aggressive about it, which they could do, but I think would be a mistake. So hopefully my gut is that this is going to be something that's relatively far off in the future, which means that there's lots of time for these base level features that they're adding to get there, and a lot of time for Blizzard's like strategy around this to adjust and evolve based on how development of those features is going. And maybe I'm just being overly optimistic here, but I believe that today's Blizzard, like Blizzard of 2025, how they're operating currently in regards to World of Warcraft, I do believe that they will genuinely want to make sure that their own offerings are good enough, they are solid enough, and they satisfy what players need out of these features before they consider cutting back on what external add-ons are capable of doing. And that, I think, is going to be the most important thing, especially for feedback on these features as we see them on the PTR. That's going to be the most important thing to focus on. Again, them talking about the add-on API thing this early has resulted in a lot of the discussion around all these features being focused entirely on don't take away my add-ons, bro, when what Blizzard desperately needs to even be able to get anywhere with this in the first place, and thus what will make things better for us as players, is if we can focus more of that feedback around the state of these features that they're implementing and less about the panic of eventually they're going to gut add-ons and then this is all I'm going to be left with. It's just more fruitful in terms of discussion if everyone could be focused on just looking at what the actual offerings are. And maybe the result is that the feedback is just, it's good enough for what it is, but I won't replace weak auras. But Blizzard could still have looked at that and been like, okay, that means we have more work to do to be able to get this to where it needs to be. I don't think they should have talked about the add-on API thing this early on, because that has changed the entire discussion around these features in a way that is going to make it harder for Blizzard to even achieve that goal in the first place, because everyone's just talking about the add-on API thing and kind of laughing at things like the cooldown manager instead of actually providing feedback that can be, not everyone, but a lot of people are doing that instead of providing feedback that can actually be beneficial towards making those features into what they need to be to accomplish that goal in the first place. Either way, we're going to have a lot to talk about on this topic and related topics over the next while from here on. We are eating good here at Sounds Good Makes Sense in terms of discussion topics for the next several episodes. Things like some of the ideas I'm already thinking of for follow-up videos. I've mentioned a couple of them throughout the video already, but other ones are things like what will have to be true about these add-ons? What is the bare minimum that will have to be the case for these add-ons before Blizzard can consider scaling back the add-on API and really analyzing what that environment actually looks like, and then extrapolating from that what these add-ons or these internal system features that are replacing these add-ons will have to be like. Things like, what could a official Blizzard damage meter actually mean for the game, and what does that? I talked about this a little bit earlier on the video, but what are the ramifications of that? And what are some ways that Blizzard can design that in order to counteract some of the concerns that come up as a result of that? Things like, I do want to, at some point, I don't know if this is going to be a different video yet or not, but I do want to talk more about the one button rotation thing and what its impact is going to end up being, and how players will approach that and how effective that, as well as the rotation helper, can actually be in terms of teaching players how to play their classes versus just sitting there mashing the button and not thinking about it. Things like how Blizzard can decomplicate WoW without losing the soul and the core of what makes WoW World of Warcraft in the first place. And I'm sure you all are going to have tons of questions and other topics that you want me to discuss and speculate on as well. So if you have any questions, please do send those in. You can either leave them as a comment here on YouTube, or if you're a patron, you can head over to patreon.com/Devilor. And there will be a link in the posting for this episode that you can click on that takes you to a Google form that you can fill out to submit your question through there. You can also just leave it as a comment on Patreon if you want, but that form is usually what I check first, because any question that comes in from a patron will get priority to be answered on the show. I will occasionally pick and choose through questions that come through YouTube on whether or not I feel like I have a great answer for it or not. But any question that comes in from a patron, unless it's like way off base, I will always answer questions that come in from patrons. So if you are a patron, please do use that method to put your questions in. But I do want to get to this one question that came from Salmon of Truth, which by the way is a great name, in response to the Twitch VOD that I put up on YouTube the other day. They said, could they be planning on using AI to analyze what players are doing for what their rotation assist recommends? So obviously talking about the new rotation assistant feature that Blizzard's adding in 11.1.7, where it kind of highlights what the next button you should be pushing is. They're approaching this from the idea of, are they going to use AI to analyze what player, rather than having a designer sit down and say, these are the buttons you should push in this order, will they instead have an AI analyze what players are doing and just from that extrapolate what the ideal rotation is instead? And this is an interesting concept. I think it would probably be a mistake based on just current AI effectiveness as it exists right now. AI is very, very good at telling you what it thinks you want to hear. It's not necessarily good at being accurate about things. So they could potentially do this as like a, hey, most players are pushing these buttons in this order, but what if most players are playing it wrong? Or what if on average, like most rogues are just spamming Sinister Strike because they're not really paying attention? Does that actually help in this guy? I don't even know what Sinister Strike still exists. I haven't played Rogue in a long time. But are most warlocks just spamming Shadow Bolt and not pressing any other buttons? Is that ideal, or is that just what players are doing? I think focusing it around what are players doing on average is kind of at best a roundabout way to get to the same result of, honestly, a Blizzard designer could just go look at like a Wowhead guide or something and plug in whatever the Wowhead guide does. Obviously, I feel if they are doing that, they should let Wowhead know, because working with Wowhead as a good partner is a good thing. But aside from that, they could just read a guide and plug in what guides are saying that they should be doing instead. Or they could put in what they think is the most appropriate thing to do. And it will still be, no matter, like if you're the sort of person that's using a rotation helper in this situation, it will probably still be good enough to be effective without the need to take the extra step of developing a whole AI to be able to try and extrapolate all of this and then fact checking that AI to make sure that it's doing the right thing. I think in this case, it's probably not a great approach for them. It could be something that they could do. We know that Blizzard has been experimenting a little bit with trying to use AI in some different ways to incorporate. I made a video about this like a year ago at this point. We know a couple of things that Blizzard is doing, that they're trying to extrapolate some information and trying to utilize AI in efficient and ethical ways for World of Warcraft. I don't really think this is an efficient one. It's probably ethical, but I don't really think this would be an efficient way for them to utilize that. I think it would still be less work overall for them to say, okay. And honestly, as I think about this could even be something that they end up going to their like QA department. There's like it's called a user experience team inside of Blizzard. There's a whole team whose job is play the game as best as you can and be good at the video game, so that way we have an in-house group of people that are good at the game to be able to get feedback from directly before we go to anything else. This could even be the sort of thing that they send to their QA team. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know how much that team still exists, because there was a whole bunch of QA cuts at Blizzard a while back, but I assume it's still around. I hope it's still around, because there's some great people on that team. Regardless, that could be the sort of thing that instead of having the designer build it, maybe this is something that they punt over to their QA team and say, okay, you guys are the ones that we have brought on to be good at these classes. Tell us what the best rotation is, so that way we can plug it into the rotation assist. That could be a way to approach that going forward. It's worth noting, this feature is already on the PTR and testable. It is possible to go over there and mess with it. At least I think it's already on if it's not already on the PTR, it will be imminently. It's already been built at the very least. I'm going to check right now in the middle of talking. Can I install the 11.1.7 PTR? I can. So yes, the PTR is already up. I should have checked that before I started recording this episode. I was too excited to get into talking about all of the meat of this episode. It was fun. But anyway, it is already up there on the PTR. That should be testable and able to check it out. So that means it's already been built, which means they're probably not using AI for it in the first place. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thought though. The concept of using like essentially crowdsourcing via AI, what people's optimal rotation is. I think it would not be a good idea, but it is possible. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for watching, and please do stay tuned over the next several weeks, because we're going to be digging into this topic a lot more in follow-up videos. Again, if you have any questions or any specific aspects of this you want to make sure that I get to, or questions about anything in general as well, please do leave a comment, or like I said earlier, if you're a patron, head over to patreon.com/Devilore and use the form over there. Big shout out to my patrons, by the way. Thank you all so much for continuing to support the channel. It really does help keep us going around here. So thank you again so much to all my patrons. Yeah, Devilore.com if you want to buy some sick merch, some Sounds Good Makes Sense merch. I don't have any at arm's reach, or else I would show you some. But you can go over to Devilore.com and check that out. Some other fun stuff over there too. And yeah, I think I'm done promoting things for now. We're going to wrap this up. Thanks again so much, everybody, and I'll see you later.